Hello again. Hi, if I could have everyone's attention, please. So, hello again. We're ready to begin the next part of our program. Before I begin, I thanked all of you for coming, and I thank you again. But the person I haven't thanked yet is Amy. And I gotta say, my sister and myself and our entire families are just so grateful that Amy was in my father's life. She was an amazing spouse. She was just an amazing person in our family, and we adopted her as part of our family, and she earned every place in it. I also just want to thank her for putting together this entire event. This was a lot of work. A lot of work and effort went into this event, and everything from the beautiful centerpieces you see to the wonderful choices of food and the venue and everything else. So, Amy, on behalf of Oscar, thank you so much for making this a meaningful event and a beautiful event. Okay. So we have a few people who indicated that they'd like to speak, and we are so grateful for that as well. So I'm just going to introduce them as they come up, and then I'll bring up the next people. The first folks are Bert and Eleanor Jaffe.
I didn't expect to be the leadoff pitcher, but here I am with a few notes. I'm always afraid being the first. Oh, no, that's the advantage, because after you're the last, then everyone has already said everything you wanted to say. But we first met Oscar and Amy in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, about the year of 2004. My wife, Eleanor, heard them talking about living in Brooklyn. She turned around, started talking, and soon learned that he grew up nearby, had been to the same yeshiva as her brother in Crown Heights. A short time later, quite by accident, our neighbor invited us and the Schachters to the same piano concert. It was horrible. He was a beginning pianist, and we had a great time laughing and getting to know each other better. What followed were many winters for the four of us in San Miguel, with lots of concerts, lectures, plays, dining out, going to a silver mine, watching a rainbow being created, going to Querétaro, and many other things. Amongst them, however, was the great hospitality that Amy and Oscar provided for us. Just like today, a great event. And many times we were there for dinners, at that time made mostly by Oscar. Now, Oscar was a great food lover, as you all know. And I remember that he loved shallots. I'm not a cook. I'd never heard of a shallot. He used to talk about the different varieties and the costs, and I was always amazed that he read Melissa Clark, the food writer for the New York Times. So there are many words that describe Oscar. They all began with F as I looked at my list. There was the food that I just mentioned. There was Florida. Oscar was always cold, but Florida was where he wanted to be. We left San Miguel in 2014, and the Schachters did too. We scouted out places in Florida, and so did they. We all wound up in Sarasota. So we're delighted to keep our relationship going for many years. F for France. This was a must for Oscar. Paris, art museums, their favorite restaurant, and their favorite French chef. F for Father Patrick Dubois. Have you heard of Yachad in Unum? Raise your hand if anyone has heard about it. This is a wonderful non-Jewish father who decided to study the atrocities in Ukraine. And since Oscar's family was from Ukraine, he was eager to be part of it and eventually became the treasurer for that organization in the United States. But F for friends. I called him my best friend. But I suspect that there are many others who called Oscar their best friend also, because he was that kind of a guy. He was warm, he was charming, he was bright, he knew what was going on, whether it was politics, law, the world. There was one friend who changed his career. Did he tell you the story of when he was driving an Austin Healey, he had a flat tire in front of his building? A neighbor who had a computer consulting business came out to help and immediately befriended Oscar. He suggested that Oscar join his company and do the legal contracts. Now, I know there's someone here who was in software business, and I may have some of these facts wrong, but as far as I remember, Oscar became the executive director of that company and stayed for 35 years. But he also rose up because he was so nice, so bright, so competent, and became president of the National Software Industry Society. I'll end with female. What a gem of a wife he chose. Amy spiced up his life. Good-looking, excellent cook, knew more about movie and TV stars and cool music that was so far from Oscar's love of classical music. But he admired everything she exposed him to. And the other F for family, of course. We did learn about his kids, although I just met them today for the first time, Charlie and Susan, and his 4 grandchildren. We heard of them over the years as they grew up, and some made their way already to college. Finally, F, we last saw Oscar at his 90th birthday party on February 25th, 2023. Another grand event that Amy created. He was weaker, so Amy divided his friends to his party in 3 different groups so that he could deal with smaller groups. I recall his dancing with Amy, slowly, carefully, hesitatingly, but with a smile on his face, even though it must have been very difficult. He died about 3 months later. Eleanor and I will miss our dear friend Oscar, who brought so much to our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. That was very touching. The next people we'd love to call up are Terry Marlowe and Michael Campbell.
I'm kind of new to Oscar. But I valued him in a way that's hard to explain exactly. A calm, deep man. Every time we talked, it was a experience for me, and the history that he had about, especially life in New York. I came to New York in '77 as a young man from a rural beginning, and it was a crazy, weird place. And people like Oscar made it that way, and that's kind of what I'd like to celebrate today. This song is actually more for Amy. soft teeth of sympathy, worry at the bone of grief, and wear it down. Soft stories in the colored air, the waterworks of murmured prayer, they fill the house and drive me out. 'Cause I can't be still and quiet, hiding like a spider from the rain. I won't let tomorrow find me waiting for yesterday. The burden of remaining upright among the living, refusing to collapse, remaking from the ruins all the things you gotta learn by doing 1,000 simple acts. And I can't be still and quiet, hiding like a spider from the rain. I won't let tomorrow find me waiting for yesterday, waiting for yesterday, waiting for yesterday. This one I kind of wrote for Oscar. It was a motif that was going on, but when his passing, it became something else. So it's a work in progress. Please listen. It's going to go somewhere different, I think, but I think it's what I see Oscar to be. I'd like to do one more. That's a song I always thought was a good way to say goodbye to somebody. Excuse me one minute. You might be able to, I think a lot of people might know this song. If you do, please sing along. There's especially a part in the middle that's supposed to be done by a saxophone, but if we got some singers here, I'm sure. So I'm going to play a little bit of that part. So if you can do it, it's na 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 before the wind, also younger than the sun. Yeah, the bonny boat was one, we sailed into the mystic. Hark now, hear the sailors cry, smell the sea and touch the sky. Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic. When that foghorn blows, I will be coming home. When that foghorn blows, I'm gonna hear it. Won't have to fear it, no, 'cause I wanna rock your gypsy soul, like way back in the days of old. Together we will go into the mystic. Here it comes. Na 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 na. Come on now, this is Oscar we're talking about. Na 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 na. Go on, Oscar.
Wow, that was kind of unexpected. And Michael, very touching. And, you know, it just made me think about my father's relationship with music. I'll just do a quick aside. Like myself, my father had no musical talent to speak of. He couldn't even carry a tune. But he was an incredible appreciator of music. He just, music moved him. He, I think, appreciated musicians and saw that they had a superpower, and just music was a big part of his life, even though he wasn't really a, you know, let's say somebody who worked in the arts, or, you know, who you would think of as sort of that traditional music appreciator, but he just loved all forms of music. And so thank you, Michael, for bringing that to our event. Next, I would like to bring up Bert Grad and Carol Ann, if one or both of you.
I have a question. My voice is lousy, so Carol Ann's going to read what I wrote. But how many of you, okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, everyone can hear.
How many of you knew Oscar in the 1950s? Besides, how about 60s?
Well, I was born in '64.
Children qualify. How about 70s?
Well, where's John Phillips? Yeah, we got.
Yeah, John. Hello, John. How about the 80s? 90s, I guess most of you are right. Okay, anyway, my voice is gone, but I spent last winter having a chance to really see Oscar and spent a lot of time with him again. So Carol Ann's going to read what we have put together. Thank you.
One of the best things, thinking about it now, that Bert brought, thank you. One of the very good things that Bert brought to our relationship was knowing Oscar. Wow, that moved me. When I first saw him, the love and the warmth just poured forth. And what an amazing gift. It's still with me. So I'm very happy to do this for Bert. I'll read if I can. It surprised me. This is what Bert's words. I first met Oscar at a computer software trade association gathering over 50 years ago. I was with IBM at the time, and Oscar was the attorney for ACT. I helped persuade Oscar to get involved in some of the software section activities, particularly those concerned with customer and vendor contracts. We also got to know each other personally during the meetings, which were held twice a year in locations like Scottsdale, San Diego, Las Vegas, New Orleans, Orlando, and even New York City. But we really became friends later after I left IBM, when ACT used me as a consultant on software strategy and business operations. After doing a couple of projects, Oscar warned me not to do any more since it was likely that ACT would not pay my bills. This was an example of Oscar's absolute honesty in his business dealings. Whether it was through his having gone to yeshiva schools from the first grade through college, or more likely from his character, you always were sure that what Oscar said was the truth, as best he knew it. After we both made major changes in our lives and had married for a second time, we became closer friends, both as a couple and individually. For example, Carol Ann loved the noise and movement of the Japanese taiko drummers, which was not my thing. As it turned out, Oscar also enjoyed their performances, but it was not really Amy's thing. So Oscar and Carol Ann would have a date each year when the taiko drummers came to the New York or other places. Now, I have to add that when they came the first time, I think they listened okay for maybe 5 seconds. And then both Amy and Bert said, "This is not for us." But Oscar and I had a wonderful connection, going to many, many concerts, and we just loved the noise. Now, as a PS, I have tickets for a taiko drumming thing this winter in Florida. It's on the East Coast, so I'm going to go over, and I know Oscar will be there with me. Now, Bert continues. Because of Hurricane Ian's damage to Sanibel, where Carol Ann and I always spent our winters, we needed to find an alternative location for 2022. Thanks to Oscar and Amy, we were able to find a house for us to rent, which they checked out to make sure that it would allow me to maneuver about comfortably. Being in Sarasota, we were able to spend quality time with them, and as an extra treat for me, and probably for Carol Ann and Amy, Oscar and I got together many weeks for lunch with extra time to talk. I learned so much more about Oscar's growing up and about his personal experiences, like the 6 years helping to manage ACT's Iranian project under the Shah's regime. We feel that the world is less warm and friendly place now that Oscar is no longer with us. We're returning to Sarasota next winter and will certainly enjoy spending time with Amy, but we will miss Oscar's wit and presence. So I want to say goodbye to my good friend, Oscar Schachter, a very special person, a real mensch.
Thank you for those touching words and your very long relationship with my father, Bert. Speaking of long relationships with my father, the next person I'd like to call up was very involved in the company you've heard mentioned several times now, Advanced Computer Techniques, and that's John and Lorraine Phillips.
Whoever made that center arrangement really knows Oscar. Yes, I met Oscar in 1968 at that organization called the DAPSO. And that was my first contact with Oscar. I'm only going to be talking about him in the sense of the business contacts and work that I did with him extensively over those years. The issues of his family life and so forth are being very well covered by the other speakers, and we're all in agreement about Oscar. After I met Oscar at ADAPSO in '68, a strange thing happened that sounds sort of like Oscar finding his way into advanced computer techniques, which is that my partner and I, Jerry Coop sitting over there, had a company, and through people that knew each other in a high-rise apartment, they said those two companies ought to talk together, and in the wind-up, we became part of Oscar's organization, Advanced Computer Techniques. There's a million things I could say about Oscar's business personality that, of course, parallel what other people have commented on. And I could list them, and I thought as I listed them, I said I'll stop at a certain point. I could go on for a long time, but there's no doubt he was a unique individual, consummate professional. He could work hard. He never gave up. Totally honest, which in some cases in the business world is pretty hard to find. And he really was inspirational to the people around him. And if I can, just to spend only a moment, I'd like to bring up three quick examples quickly. Anyone want any more details, we can always go over them. But for now, the first one was already mentioned. He was part of ADAPSO at the time that ADAPSO was the only organization connected to the computer, software, and hardware organizations in this growing new field called, the computer field. And it was pretty much a Wild West. And Oscar was the person who they turned to try to organize one of the most important aspects of it, which was contracts. Because contracts, related to this new crazy area called software, were nowhere to be found. He did major work on it and had a major effect on the industry in terms of the work that he did in contracts over the years, from then on into the new millennium. He was doing sessions and conferences and so forth, specifically on the work of trying to make the contract practical, reasonable, fair, all the kind of words you connect with them. So he was extremely intelligent, extremely dedicated, and I thought that example of that and the importance of Oscar was a good example. The second example was that the other point that was made. Oscar was number 2 in advanced computer techniques. Most people don't know of advanced computer techniques now, but at the time it was considered a breakthrough, state-of-the-art software organization. And it was run by a man who we all knew and loved. He was extremely bright, extremely aggressive. He knew a lot about ideas about the future. He wrote several famous books on the future of the computer industry. But he was kind of a Peck's bad boy in terms of he'd really go out there and push the envelope. And he needed someone who was able to work with him and kind of keep him inside some kind of railings as he went out there and did all the exciting work that he did. And Oscar was the perfect person for him. And the meetings that we had were really very, very interesting to watch the two of them. And Charlie would get frustrated. His name was Charles Lecht. Charlie would get frustrated with Oscar, and Oscar would be saying, look, you can only do this, you can't do that. But at the end of the day, Charlie always said, oh, you're right, okay. And Charlie really loved Oscar. The last one is very interesting. The biggest contract that we had was, in fact, with the Shah of Iran. And Charlie won that contract through very creative work and so on and so forth. And we were subcontractors to one of the big aerospace firms. I think it was Lockheed, but I don't remember for sure. And we had to build an inventory system because the Shah was buying airplanes from everybody, and all the parts were getting mixed up. You shouldn't put a Russian this in an American that, and so on and so forth, because I guess it wouldn't fly well. So we were involved in that job. And of all things, the way the world turns, after doing it for a number of years, very successfully, the prime contractor decided that they wanted that money too, so they pushed us out of the contract. About 3 weeks later, the revolution occurred, and we were already out, okay? So it's funny how, God works sometimes on those things. And then, as you might remember, the world announced that they wouldn't give any money of Iran back until all of these companies were satisfied that they were paid for what was taken by the new government. And you had to do paperwork, send it to The Hague. They look it over and they said, if your paperwork is sufficient, you come to The Hague and you sit down with their help and negotiate with Iran. And someone from the company had to go to Iran, and most of us didn't really want to go to Iran when it was under the Shah. So none of us really wanted to go to Iran right now. And of course, we all knew it had to be Oscar anyway. So Oscar went to Iran, and he told me many times about what happened there. And simply stated, he goes into a room, there's a man sitting opposite him. It's the only man left from the project of the Iranians. All the rest are all murdered. And behind him is a religious man with beads who never talked. And the man had to keep right on the contract issues, no other discussions, until it was solved. And Oscar brought back the first American contract, world contract. We got paid everything. It's quite amazing. And you think back on him and his personality. People have discussed his honesty, his directness, and he was really something, really something. And he makes you want to be a better man. That's it.
Thank you so much, John. That was beautiful. And it's amazing how, at almost 60, I can still be learning new things about my father. And I knew about all his trips to Iran, but I had forgotten that story specifically about that meeting. So thank you, John. Another person who was very intimately involved in my father in advanced computer techniques is the next person I'd like to introduce, and that's David Goldstein. And by the way, if you go out and look at the display, there's a document there from 1980. It's a visa application to go to Japan. And I noticed that it had been signed by my father. What I didn't notice on the bottom is that it had been signed by David as the notary to attest.
That's proof that I knew Oscar back in 1980. I'm one of those few people who was involved in both Oscar's professional life and his social life. Let's see, I have some notes. I might as well use them. Yeah. I missed Oscar's funeral, but I wanted to be here today to let you know how much Oscar meant to me and how much he influenced my life. Despite missing his funeral, I was fortunate to have seen and talked to Oscar on the Friday before he passed. Amy invited me up there knowing that Oscar was basically comatose. He was not responsive, but at least I was able to say goodbye to him. And I think in hope he heard my farewell, because hearing is the last sense to fail. At various times, Oscar was my boss, my mentor, and most importantly, my friend. When I joined ACT back in 1976, I was hired as a senior consultant. I was a computer expert, programmer, etc. And I was midway through law school. When I left 13 years later, Oscar was president of ACT and I was VP and general counsel. When I left, I was ready, willing, and able to become general counsel and chief operating officer of another company. Oscar was largely responsible for my growth as an attorney. After I was admitted to the bar, Charlie Lecht pushed Oscar to take me on as his associate. Oscar was reluctant because he knew ACT really could not afford a second lawyer, even though he was doing the work of 2 lawyers. We worked closely for over 10 years and bonded professionally when we worked on the ouster of Charlie Lecht from ACT. There aren't a lot of people who understand that one. Right, Jerry? Anyway, Charlie Lecht was a genius, but he paid no attention to the money. The rest of us were trying to figure out how we were going to make the next payroll, and Charlie goes out and buys another Beamer. This is not prudent money management. So it finally got to the point of how do we get Charlie out of the company, given that he was president, CEO, and primary shareholder. There was a way. As I studied it, Charlie had set up a voting trust involving himself, John Phillips, who was a VP, and Oscar, that had the power to vote the stock owned by all 3 of them. And so we voted Charlie out of office. Charlie, it was a mess legally, but we had some fun out of it and learned a lot about it. But the people who are familiar with ACT know the story and can get a good laugh out of it. Anyway, we worked closely for those years and had quite a time. We bonded professionally on our trips to the Netherlands for the case ACT brought before the Iran-U.S. Claims Tribunal. That was another interesting one. At the time we got all done with the contracts involving Iran, they still owed us a lot of money, which they weren't paying. And we had no basis to go after them until they signed those wonderful Iran-U.S. Settlement options and whatever. And then as I was reading that, I discovered it sounds like our case really is within the scope of it, even though it was intended to involve, even though we were thrown out before the Shah was thrown out, it still fell within the scope. And I reviewed it with Oscar, and we agreed that it made sense, and we ended up bringing the case. Because we were such a small company, we could not afford significant international lawyers, so I read cases everybody else had filed and copied them. Typical lawyer work. And it worked. My late wife, Elisa, and I socialized with Oscar and Amy for almost the entire period when they were together. We first met them as a couple when they were on a second date visiting an antique show in Baltimore, because one of my avocations was I was an antique dealer, and Oscar was a friend and customer who always stopped by. And I have to say that in many respects, we were responsible for him becoming the collector that he initially and he and Amy were as a couple. We watched their relationship grow. Initially, Oscar was Henry Higgins to Amy's Eliza Doolittle. No, I mean, Oscar was into classical music and a sophisticated eating and dining, and Amy kept it simple. And if you look at the menu, okay, I can eat that one. It was funny to watch. I mean, wine was not within her scope, and as all of you know, Oscar was pretty much a wino. Anyway, it was a real pleasure to watch their relationship evolve, and it was especially interesting with the music, because Oscar taught Amy about classical music and fine dining, and Oscar taught him about modern music. We were at the 50-70 party 20 years ago, and we watched Amy evolve to become a caregiver as well as a spouse. We would see each other several times a year, whether north or south. And it's particularly interesting because at the time Oscar and Amy met, she was contemplating moving to Florida, and Florida was nowhere within Oscar's picture. When he told us that they were moving to Florida for the winter, it was like, what? Of course, that was almost as strange as him moving to Brooklyn, because this is a boy who was meant to live in Manhattan. And we followed them through a lot of addresses. The Oscar and Amy line in my address book is very long. We would see each other several times a year, whether north or south, depending on where we all were, and shared our common interest in collecting. Oscar and Amy continued our friendship after my wife Elisa had passed and I met Arona, my fiancée and life partner. I will miss my friend and mentor. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's so wonderful to hear from people who've known my father for so long, and thank you, David, again. We have one final person I'd like to call up, and that is Mike Brand. Mike, I don't know where you are. Ah, there you are.
Not sure why Amy put me last, but I wrote some words down. So I knew Oscar, I was a very young man at the time. So it was back in the early 90s. I was in my early 20s. This is going to really be hard. But I was a college dropout. So I was learning how to write software. I was actually working with Jim and John and Jerry, and they all gave me an opportunity. Oscar gave me an opportunity. And what was really just special about it was really all the words that you've been hearing today, just how the integrity, the honesty, and that's really what I learned from him. And he really set me on my career. I'm currently an executive vice president of a technology company, but a lot of the foundational lessons I learned from him, and they stay with me today. And so I'm gonna read down, kind of going off script. So I was a young man finding my way, college dropout. I met Oscar when he was a general counsel, and as people have said later, he became CEO. I should have been intimidated. He was a highly educated, polished professional with wisdom. Me, not so much. But this is something about Oscar that you all know. You were never intimidated by him. You just wanted to listen. You wanted to learn. You wanted to be with him. I always did, and I can already see that you all did too. It was 1995. I remember this moment. I tell the story a lot, actually. He invited me to dinner. At this dinner, he had asked me, Mike, do you like wine? And I said, I like it, but I don't really know much about it. And he was like, oh. And of course, he went on and on about wine. And that night, he said, we're going to get a special bottle. He goes, I want you to really understand and really appreciate what we're going to have together here. And he ordered, it was a 1992 Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon from Groth Vineyards in California. And why do I remember that? Because I think anybody here who loves wine, and I've asked this question of many people over the years, if you love wine, there's likely a bottle of wine that made you fall in love with wine. And that was it for me. That was my bottle. My wife is giggling. So we drank that wine. He described it to me. He told me what I was going to taste. He told me what I was going to feel in my mouth. He told me what I was going to experience, where the wine came from, why you were going to get those notes, why you were going to feel what you felt, why you were going to taste what you tasted. And I did. And all of a sudden, wine wasn't just a bottle of liquid. It was special. It was meaningful. It showed passion. It was commitment. It was this beautiful thing. And he taught me that. So my wife and I got married about a year ago. And when I proposed to her in Napa. And the first winery we went to was Groth. And yes, I proposed in Napa because I wanted to make sure the odds were in my favor, and she did say yes, obviously, so that worked out pretty well. So Oscar, he always just let me be me. He never judged me. He never wanted me to be anything other than who I was. And he was my mentor. He was my teacher. He taught me respect. He taught me to have passion. He taught me integrity. He taught me honesty. He taught me to do the right thing. I was talking with some folks earlier, and a lot of times you sometimes wonder what the right thing is, but it's really not that hard. And when you know what you're doing, you know it's the right thing, that's when you feel good. And Oscar knew that, and he taught me that, and I carry that to this day. So one thing I'll say is the greatest mentors really can leave a lifelong impression, and Oscar did that for me. I probably haven't seen him in 25 years. I haven't spent the time with him that you all have, but I'm living proof that he left an imprint on so many other people, and I'm just glad I was able to represent them here today. So thank you.
I'm blown away by some of the things I'm hearing here today. I did not expect this. I will say this. So my father did love wine. He was a drinker, but he was not a drinker to excess. Rarely ever saw him drunk. But my father and I did actually once get drunk together, which not everybody gets the experience of doing with their father. He invited me to one of these Burgundy wine tastings. Again, he had joined, as you'll see in that display in the front, in 1974. He was inducted into the most prestigious international Burgundian wine society, where he learned a lot of what he learned. And they would have gatherings in Midtown Manhattan where they would open up, incredible wines and have these wine tastings. And sometime when I was in college, or maybe just after college, he invited me and we went, and we got blitzed. I mean, we were drunk. And that was the one and only time I ever really got drunk with my father, and it was a very enjoyable experience. I'd like to read, so Amy received a lot of notes, obviously, since my father's passing. And I wanted to just read a couple of excerpts from these, and because they just felt meaningful. Oscar was always sharp, alert, eager for a good intellectual debate, a great meal, a good bottle, always refined in his manner and clothing, always ready to be with a friend when help or presence was needed. We will miss Oscar. He was such a good listener. It was so easy to talk with him about almost anything. He followed the principle of kindness to others and never hesitated to help anyone who could use his assistance and support. This person simply said, Oscar was a true gentleman in every sense of the word. This person said, I'm a software engineer who worked for Oscar at ACT from 1985 to 1991. And of all the heads of companies I've worked for in my career, he was the one I held in highest regard. He was a good person who conducted himself in the CEO role with both competence and integrity. That very special twinkle in his eyes, his smile, and his wit are vivid memories. We were sad to receive your message about Oscar. It's hard to imagine the world without him. It was certainly a better place because he was in it. He was such an extraordinary, special person, and we feel grateful to have had some time as his friend. I love this one. Oscar was always a feminist and the only true one in our close circle, always supportive of the women when alpha males raised their heads somewhere else. Getting to know Oscar was a deep pleasure. His love of art and music ran deep. Even better, he liked to share his appreciation and thereby enrich the lives of others. No doubt he was a brilliant professional man, a brilliant mind with wide interests. But more than that, he often touched me by his spontaneous generosity, his thoughtfulness, his kindness. His caring for others was genuine. He gave time and effort and counted them well spent. Someone wrote simply, "So wise, patient, and smart. We were lucky to know him." Oscar was such a vital, warm, and kind person who will always remain in my heart. I am so grateful for all the wonderful times we had together and cherish those memories from our childhood. And one final, this one's a little bit longer. I've been thinking about the two ways one can walk through the world. One can be visibly present, leaving one's mark and creating a permanent change in the community. Or one can be light and graceful, leaving no footsteps that mar the landscape. Oscar did both. He was present and he was light. He left a mark on world history, yet his communal footsteps were graceful and airy, almost dancing above the ground. Finally, I just would like to close with this. So as I was going through the many things that Amy brought back from Florida of my father's papers, photographs, memorabilia, I found his high school yearbook, which I had never seen before. And as I'm flipping through his high school yearbook, I come across a poem that my father had written. Now, as you've heard, my father was a great lawyer, wrote the best contracts in the software industry, but I never knew he had written a poem. I didn't think of him as a poet. And this poem, written when he was 18 years old, I think is very appropriate today because as an 18-year-old, he contemplates birth, life, and death. So let me just read this to you very quickly. It's called The Noise of Man by Oscar Schachter. The mother, heavy with child, groans and sighs on the bed. And then a cry rends the air. A child is demanding and grasping its way into the world. At 2, the toddling legs make soft, rain-like patters on the bare floor. The noise of the school at 5 sends the child crying with large gobs of heartbreaking tears. The cheering and laughing at graduation mark the end of youth's gay and boisterous life and send him into manhood. Here again, dominated by noise of his wedding, slow and solemn, of his first pay, crisp, crinkly dollars and hard, tinkling change, awe-inspiring noise of industry, the first day, commanding, rasping voice of a man ordering other men. The creak of a lone warning of life's persistent pursuer. The noise of death's imaginary tread haunting his dreams. Cries of his loved ones as the dying man leaves the world. Noise of the hammer knocking in the last nail of the coffin. Soft plunk of the earth on the coffin. Then silence. So I thought that was a very I thought that that showed incredible maturity on my father's behalf, that as an 18-year-old, he was able to contemplate his own mortality and I think show us all the way that we can be better people in the world. So I guess, Amy, unless there's anything that you want to add, or no, I think Amy's too verklempt. So I just want to close by, again, thanking all of you. I know some of you came from near and some of you came from quite far, and we just really appreciate that you felt so much in your heart for my father, that you chose to be here today and celebrate his life with us. So again, from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of my sister and our families and Amy, I thank you again. Okay.